Hi there, welcome to the Pelsis YouTube channel. Now everyone knows about slugs. You see them in your garden, you see them on the paths, on the streets, everywhere around you in the summer and in the spring and the autumn as well. They can be a real menace to gardeners and farmers. But how do you know what makes them tick and what are the best ways to deal with a slug problem when you've got one? I'm speaking to Lisa Harlow here, who is a product manager at Pelsis Doff, to find out a little bit more about slugs. So, Lisa, how do you know if you've got a slug problem to start with?
Okay, so if you're a farmer, the first thing that you'll probably notice is the fact that when you drill your new crop, the crop doesn't emerge, or if the crop's very small, you'll see the leaves being eaten.
Yeah.
Um, and actually, what you want to do is try and stop those leaves being eaten. So the first thing is you may see slugs on the surface of the soil as well, but the main thing is your crop will either not emerge or you'll just see leaves that are eaten, and then the crop doesn't grow because it takes the growing point out of the plant.
So you should be looking at your crops not growing and think maybe there's a slug problem here, as well as all the other things it could potentially be.
Yeah, you should be looking at that, but actually you should be thinking about it before that point. So as a farmer, you'll know your own fields. So you'll know the fields where you've had slug problems before. Quite often that is to do with soil types. So if you've got heavy clay soils, they're usually hold moisture, and so the slugs find that much easier to live in. Also, if there's been cover crops drilled, that gives a haven for slugs to go into and hide in. So that's another thing you need to think about. And when you drill your crop, you need to think about how you've drilled it. So if you're ploughing, that actually helps because actually you can cut up some of the slugs, but you'll bury the slugs. So ploughing helps to slow down slugs. But if you're direct drilling straight into the stubble, you'll find much more slugs. And if it's a wet season and you get cloddy seed beds, even when you've rolled, those clods can mean that there's places for slugs to hide underneath. So there's lots of things that can tell you that you're going to have a slug problem before you actually get to the point where your crop's not being emerged. We can also trap in fields, which means basically you can go and put down a tile or a piece of carpet, just something in the field, and you probably should put 4 or 5 in a sort of a 10 hectare field, and then go back the next day and look under the tile or the carpets and see if you can see any slugs in there, because the slugs, so basically slugs will be attracted, and they come out at night to feed, and they're not going to disappear down the soil. So you can actually, if you go out in the morning, you should be able to see them. And there are thresholds there for the main crops where we see damage is cereals and oilseed rape. So basically, if you see 1 slug in oilseed rape, you should be treating. And if you see 4 in cereals, you should be treating. So you can do that just as you're drilling so that you can assess the risk. So actually, you want to get to the point where you don't see the damage in the fields and do something beforehand.
Right, fabulous. I mean, so obviously farmers these days are introducing different crops. You mentioned cover crops, but obviously different environmental practices are encouraging farmers to diversify and use different plants. Would that also potentially bring slugs into the equation where they haven't seen slugs before?
So you could just, so if you're drilling winter wheat after oilseed rape, and that's mainly to do with the amount of trash that you leave on the top of the soil. So if there's lots of organic material left in the soil surface, then that's a haven for slugs. So it makes them more prevalent. If you've got very light sandy soil, you're not going to get slugs, but most of the land in the UK that grows arable crops is on clay soils, which is why we see it as such a problem here.
I see, right. Well, 'cause my next question is actually going to be how do they breed and spread so effectively? Because everybody knows that there are sort of slugs everywhere. You can't turn a stone over without finding them. They must be very good at what they do. Why is that?
Yeah, they are very, very clever animals, very clever. Um, so actually they're what we call hermaphrodites in biology, which means that they have both male and female reproductive organs. So every single slug that's out there can lay eggs. So it's not just like quite often in nature, it's just the females, but every single slug that's out there can lay eggs. Um, they depend on moisture. Their bodies are actually made up of 90% water, which is why
Right.
when you see them, they look very wet and you see the slime trails and everything. So they need moisture, which is why in warm and wet conditions we see more slugs, and that actually coincides with when farmers are drilling winter cereal crops. Um, and actually, each slug can lay up to 500 eggs in 1 year. And each of those eggs has a potential to develop into a mature slug. And then slugs have a lifespan of about 9 to 12 months. So you can quite easily see how quickly those populations can build up, especially in the right weather conditions.
Right. So if you maybe haven't dealt with slugs before, or you've just started on some more land, or changed your practices recently, you've not seen slugs before, and suddenly you're seeing them, this could be because you've introduced this incredibly successful breeding machine into your land without knowing it.
Yeah, it's more likely that they're there, and all the factors that I talked about earlier, like soil type and crop history. So it's more likely that they're there. But if you've taken on some new land, you don't know. So farmers are very good. They remember their fields. They know, they can point to a bit of a field and say that bit there has more slugs or it's got this weed. So they know their fields very well. But if they're taking on new land, then actually they have to go and maybe do some trapping, I would say, is the best thing to do. Think about the crops that have been grown before if they know, but actually trapping in those circumstances will give them a really good indication if they've got a high slug pressure in those fields.
And so if you do find you have a slug problem, you put your traps in, you're getting lots of slugs in there, what can you do about it?
So the best way to control slugs is actually to use a slug pellet. So the only product that's registered in the UK and legal to use is a product called ferric phosphate, an active ingredient. And here at Pelsis DOF, we produce a slug pellet called Fire Scale, which contains 29 grams of ferric phosphate. So it's one of several pellets that are out there. But yeah, if you find slugs and you know that the weather forecast is wet and mild, then you should be treating with a slug pellet as soon as possible because timing is critical because they can quite easily get that crop before it even emerges, or when it's got very young leaves that are easy to eat, and it can, within a few days, if the pressure's high, you can see it takes the entire crop out.
Right, so we have this sort of view of slugs being something that eats leaves above ground. We've all seen leaves with holes in that slugs have been at, but actually a lot of the damage is done underground because that's where slugs go when it's hot and during the day.
Yeah, so literally just under, maybe in the top 2 to 5 centimeters of soil. So basically the farmer will drill the crop and then the crop emerges and it puts out a little small shoot, which then grows before you see it pop through the soil. And slugs love those like young shoots, so they will feed on those and actually not on the surface. And we know that slugs will come out and feed at night, so between dusk and dawn, and we know they go down the soil surface. But actually, the top bit of the soil, they're quite protected. One of the reasons they feed at night is because it means that they're not as susceptible to predators because their birds love to eat slugs. So it's one of those things where, yeah, it's not just about what's above the soil, it's about when the farmer plants it and starts growing it. And that's when, farmers might say, why has my crop not emerged? And the reason it's not emerged is the slug population is so high that it's taken it all off before it's had a chance to come through the ground.
Oh, fabulous. Well, that sounds like some good tips for finding and also dealing with slugs once you've got them. So, good luck farming out there. Look out for slugs, and we'll see you soon.